My name is Lily Brown, and I am 34 years old. On the morning of my birthday, something happened that would irreversibly change the course of my life, though at the time I had no idea. I stepped outside my small but cozy garden, intending only to clear my head and savor the quiet before the birthday chaos began. It was one of those rare mornings when the city had not yet woken, when even the relentless hum of traffic seemed to pause, and I felt for a fleeting moment almost serene. The sun had just started its lazy climb over the horizon, casting a soft gold over everything it touched. Dew still clung to the grass, sparkling like tiny diamonds. It was, in every sense, perfect. I had no idea that perfection was about to be shattered. As I rounded the corner near the fire pit, I froze. My stomach sank, a cold and immediate realization creeping over me. There, lying amidst the ash and the faint smoke curling toward the sky, was my debit card, warped, half-melted, blackened from flames that had clearly burned hot and fast. The plastic had curled inward in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if mocking me. My eyes traced the familiar numbers, smudged and distorted, and my chest tightened. The acrid smell of burnt plastic hit me next, sharp, chemical, almost suffocating. It made me gag slightly, my stomach twisting in knots. But the card itself was only the beginning. When I returned inside, shaking, my hands trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from dropping my laptop, I logged into my account. My eyes scanned the transactions. I knew something was wrong before I even had to look closely. £30,000. Every single penny I had saved, every late-night project, every skipped dinner with friends, every careful budgeting decision, it had been drained. My dream of finally buying my own condo, the one I had envisioned for years, the one that represented independence, security, freedom, was gone. Gone in an instant. I sat down hard, my mind reeling. I couldn't breathe properly. The world around me seemed to shrink to the size of that screen, those transactions scrolling in red letters that might as well have been carved into my chest. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every luxury purchase, it was not random. It was deliberate, meticulous, mocking. My stomach churned as my mind raced. Who could have done this? Who would have had access to the system, to the codes, to the keys to my life savings? Only 3 people had access to my security system and alarm codes. Me, Uncle Robert, and Mara, my step-aunt, Mara. Just the thought of her sent a shiver down my spine. Cold, sharp, polished. She had a presence that demanded attention, a charisma that masked cruelty. But the most dangerous thing about her was her eyes. They didn't just see you. They dissected you. They cut through lies, through defenses, through your very soul. Mara had a way of asking casual questions that carried hidden teeth, small but precise, designed to probe, manipulate, and unsettle. And then there was Lila, my cousin. The echo of Mara's arrogance, the physical embodiment of entitlement, pretty, spoiled, dripping in designer clothes, never working a day in her life, yet somehow always expecting the world to bend to her whims. She had the kind of confidence born from being untouchable in a world that favored wealth and appearances. Together they were a formidable team of selfish cunning, and now I understood why. Over the past few weeks, both Mara and Lila had shown an unusual, almost insidious interest in my finances. It hadn't been overt at first. Small, seemingly innocent questions about budgeting, investment strategies, spending habits. But there had been an edge to it, a probing curiosity that only made sense now in retrospect. They had been planning, waiting, and they had struck with precision. My account logs confirmed it. Mara's lavish charity transfers, Lila's extravagant $10,000 spa charge, all executed in the quiet hours of the morning when I was asleep, unaware, dreaming of simple things like finally having my own space, my own life. And then the messages came, almost in tandem, as if mocking me directly. Mara's text. "Parties at ATAP tonight, darling. Manage, won't you?" And Lila's photo from Venice, holding a glass of champagne, her smile as sharp and smug as the cut of her designer dress. It was flaunting, deliberate, a taunt. Look what you've made possible for me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't even think clearly. The betrayal was raw, visceral. The anger that surged through me was a physical thing, a burning ache in my chest, a tremor in my hands, a storm behind my eyes. And yet, amid the chaos of my emotions, one thought crystallized with brutal clarity. They had underestimated me. The quiet cousin, the one who always faded into the background, the one they considered harmless, insignificant. They had assumed I would crumble, that I would cry, that I would beg or plead, but they were wrong. I reached for my phone, my fingers moving with a kind of automatic precision, and sent a single message. Sanjay Patel, our family lawyer. It's tonight. Ready? Almost immediately his reply came back, all set. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The stage was set. Every element was in place, and for the first time since the devastation, I felt the first flicker of control, the first glimmer of power returning to my hands. I spent the day meticulously planning. Every detail mattered. The timing, the positioning, the witnesses, the evidence, it all had to be perfect. Mara and Lila were dangerous, not just because of their resources, but because of their arrogance. They assumed everything was predictable, that people behaved as they expected. And arrogance, I realized, was their greatest weakness. By mid-afternoon, I had reviewed my plan a dozen times. I rehearsed my expressions, the casual ease I would present, the feigned ignorance I would maintain. Every interaction had to feel organic, unforced, unthreatening. Mara thrived on underestimation. Lila thrived on indulgence. I would exploit both. The hours dragged. I busied myself with minor chores, tidying my apartment, arranging flowers, and occasionally checking the clock. My heartbeat was steady now, controlled, but beneath the surface, a coiled tension lingered, ready to spring. Each chime of the clock reminded me that time was moving inexorably toward confrontation, toward exposure, toward justice. By 6 p.m, I was ready. Dressed simply, elegantly, in a muted navy dress, no flashy jewelry, nothing to suggest wealth or pretense, I stepped back and observed myself in the mirror. The reflection that stared back at me was calm, composed, deceptively serene, perfect. My eyes, though held a spark, a warning, barely visible, but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look. I double-checked the document Sanjay had prepared, all the records of unauthorized transactions, all the logs and proof, all the corroborating evidence that would leave Mara and Lila exposed beyond any argument. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency planned. I felt a thrill of anticipation, a dangerous excitement, the kind that comes from knowing the moment of reckoning is at hand. 8 o'clock arrived with unnerving precision. I had arranged the meeting at my apartment, the one place I knew Mara and Lila would never suspect. It was intimate, familiar, neutral territory, and I had ensured there would be witnesses, people whose testimony could never be questioned. Sanjay stood discreetly in the corner, his presence a silent reassurance. Mara arrived first, as expected, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Every step a statement of power, every movement calculated. She smiled at me, all honeyed charm, but I could see it in her eyes. The tiniest flicker of anticipation, of confidence that she would dominate this interaction, that she would emerge unscathed. Lila followed, laughing too loudly, tossing her hair, flaunting her Venetian indulgence as if it were a personal victory over me. I welcomed them both with the perfect blend of warmth and composure. "Happy birthday to me," I said lightly, a small sardonic smile playing at my lips. Mara's eyebrows lifted. Lila giggled. They had no idea what was coming. As the conversation flowed, I remained calm, even friendly, guiding them subtly, laying verbal breadcrumbs that would lead them exactly where I wanted. The air was charged, a subtle tension building beneath the surface, unnoticed by them but crystal clear to me. And then, as the clock approached 8:30, I let the first piece of evidence slip. A casual mention of the recent charity transfers Mara had made from my account, phrased innocuously. Her smile faltered, just a fraction, and Lila's laugh caught in her throat. I let them stew in the discomfort of suspicion for a moment longer, savoring the subtle, delicious panic that crept into their expressions. By 9 o'clock, I revealed everything: the logs, the withdrawals, the purchases, the precise timing, the evidence that implicated them beyond doubt. Mara's carefully curated composure cracked, her voice rising, sharp, defensive. Lila went pale, her spoiled confidence evaporating, replaced by genuine fear, and I watched, impassive, as the truth sank in. The stage I had set so meticulously, the hours of planning and restraint culminated in this moment of exposure. The quiet cousin, underestimated, dismissed, ignored, had orchestrated a reckoning, and the look on their faces, shock, disbelief, horror, betrayal, was more satisfying than any birthday gift I could have imagined. For the first time in 3 days, I felt something I hadn't in a long while: peace. Not complete, perhaps, because the wounds of betrayal run deep, but a sense of closure, of justice delivered, and a powerful reminder that underestimation is often a fatal error. They had thought they were untouchable. They had thought they could manipulate, steal, and flaunt without consequence, and now they knew that the quiet cousin, the one they had dismissed, had been watching, waiting, and preparing all along. Tonight, my birthday, which had begun in devastation and heartbreak, ended with vindication, and for the first time in years, I slept knowing that the future, my future, was once again mine to control. I didn't sleep a single second that night, not even a fleeting blink of unconsciousness. My mind refused to rest, and neither did my heart. It pounded violently against my ribcage, a relentless drumbeat of fear, anger, and disbelief. Every time I closed my eyes, the images returned. The melted debit card lying in the fire pit, warped and blackened, mocking me. The smell of burning plastic, sharp and acrid, seemed to linger in the corners of my mind like a cruel perfume, refusing to dissipate. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks and shadows, letting my thoughts spiral into places I tried to avoid. Mara's voice echoed in my head, calm, controlled, smug, and it grated against my nerves. "Darling, manage, won't you?" The memory of Lila's laughter, shrill and mocking, pierced my skull like a sharpened blade. Rage, fear, despair, they swirled inside me, a violent storm that threatened to pull me under. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced with a clarity born of raw adrenaline. I couldn't sleep because sleep meant surrender, and surrender was not an option. By the early morning, I forced myself upright. I had responsibilities, appearances to maintain, and enemies to outwit. I went through the motions mechanically, answering emails, editing designs, speaking politely to clients, offering the occasional polite smile. On the outside, I appeared calm, professional, unshaken. Inside, however, I was unraveling, thread by thread. My savings had been obliterated. The dream of my own condo, the quiet sanctuary I had imagined for years, was destroyed in one swift, cruel act. My pride, the invisible armor I carried so carefully, lay in fragments at my feet. It was then that Uncle Robert called. His voice, calm and steady, was a fragile thread of hope in my tumultuous storm. "I hear tonight's gala is going to be important. You holding up?" he asked, carefully measured, probing without prying. "I'm fine, Uncle. I'll manage," I lied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. I had learned long ago that appearances mattered more than reality when it came to dealing with people like Mara and Lila. There was a pause on the line. "Good. That's what I hoped," he said finally, before ending the call. The brief conversation, though short, gave me a sliver of reassurance. Uncle Robert had always been the voice of reason, the anchor in our otherwise chaotic family. His confidence in me reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone in this battle. I spent the rest of the day meticulously poring over every piece of evidence I could gather. Bank statements, partially recovered security footage, Mara's login attempts, Lila's time-stamped photos, all of it told a story of calculated betrayal. Every transaction, every indulgence, every lavish transfer was a carefully executed plan, a display of their audacity and arrogance. The proof was undeniable, irrefutable, and I let it sit before me, letting its weight settle into my bones. All I had to do now was wait. Patience was my weapon, invisibility my shield. And then came Lila's latest provocation. A photo appeared on social media, uploaded from Venice. She was sprawled across a velvet sofa, cocktail in hand, sunlight glinting off her designer sunglasses. The caption mocked me as much as it flaunted my loss. "Some of us know how to celebrate properly. Thanks for funding the fun, cuz. I felt my blood run cold. It was audacious, brazen, an insult etched into pixels. She was flaunting her theft, daring me to react, daring me to show my frustration. But I didn't. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I reminded myself that invisibility is a weapon. Let them believe they had won. Let them bask in their arrogance. The quieter I stayed, the harder the fall would be. And believe me, when the fall came, it would be devastating. The morning of the gala arrived with an almost cruel punctuality. I looked at myself in the mirror, assessing every detail, every imperfection. Dark circles lay beneath my eyes, a testament to sleepless nights and burning rage. My shoulders were slightly hunched, my lips pressed thin in concentration. I was a picture of calm on the surface, yet inside, a fire burned. A fire fueled by betrayal, by injustice, and by a desire for vindication. As I zipped up my simple, elegant dress, I made a silent vow. Tonight they would see me. Tonight they would understand that the quiet cousin, the one who had always been underestimated, had been watching all along. Hours of planning, days of anticipation, and months of silent observation had led to this very moment. I was ready. The hours crawled by as if mocking my impatience. Every tick of the clock was a hammer, a reminder of the slow approach of reckoning. Every car passing outside made me flinch. My mind alternated between rehearsing the confrontation and imagining every possible outcome. I pictured Mara's face when she realized her smug confidence would crumble. I imagined Lila's gasp when her carefully curated image of invincibility shattered. Every scenario was a tantalizing prospect, and yet I reminded myself to stay composed. I had learned long ago that anticipation amplifies triumph. The longer they believed they had won, the sweeter their eventual humiliation would be. Finally, the moment arrived. The sapphire pavilion awaited, its grand doors reflecting the golden evening light. Inside, chandeliers sparkled like frozen fireworks, their crystals catching the light and scattering it across the polished marble floors. The air was perfumed with a blend of floral arrangements and expensive cologne, and the hum of conversations added a vibrancy that contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside me. Mara arrived first, as predicted. Emeralds adorned her neck and wrists, glittering menacingly as she moved, her smile polished but venomous. Every movement was a statement of power, every glance a test of dominance. Lila trailed close behind, snapping photos, documenting the evening as though it already belonged to her. Their confidence radiated, intoxicating and poisonous, and for a moment, I let myself study them, not with fear, not with envy, but with a calculated curiosity, and then, there was me. I moved through the room like a shadow, understated, unassuming. My dress was simple but elegant, a contrast to their ostentation. I smiled politely at acquaintances, engaged in brief, seemingly inconsequential conversations, and kept my head down. Because patience, I knew, was the first step toward victory. Every detail of my posture, my expressions, my interactions was deliberate. I was the quiet observer, the unnoticed presence, until the time was right. The gala stretched on, each passing minute intensifying the tension I held like a coiled spring. I watched Mara laugh, her voice lilting and false, a mask for the insecurity that I knew simmered beneath. Lila flaunted her stolen indulgences with reckless abandon, unaware that each act was catalogued, memorized, and stored in the recesses of my mind. I noted their movements, their habits, their small tells. The way Mara tilted her head when she was unsure, the flicker in Lila's eyes when she sensed a potential threat. I mingled quietly, collecting information, gauging reactions, and mentally preparing for the moment of exposure. My heart, though calmer than it had been in days, still beat with a feral anticipation. I reminded myself constantly, timing was everything. One wrong move, one slip, and the advantage would be lost. But I was meticulous, patient, and fully aware of the stakes. Hours passed, each tick of the grand clock in the pavilion echoing in my mind. And then, just as the night seemed to stretch into eternity, I saw the perfect opening. Mara's attention was momentarily diverted. Lila's fingers paused mid-gesture, and I knew that the moment of revelation had arrived. Invisibility would give way to confrontation, subtlety would give way to truth, and the quiet cousin would finally be seen. I approached, every step measured, every gesture calculated. My voice was calm, steady, unassuming, as I initiated a conversation that would, with each passing word, unravel the carefully constructed facades of both women. Evidence slipped into the dialogue almost casually, like a magician revealing the final trick. At first, their reactions were micro-expressions, barely noticeable: a tightened jaw, a flicker of the eyes, a slight stiffening of posture. But soon, the truth began to dawn. Mara's polished smile faltered, just slightly, and Lila's laughter died in her throat. I continued calmly, methodically, revealing the extent of their betrayal, the evidence of their theft, and the depth of their audacity. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, as both women realized with escalating horror that their confidence had been their downfall. By the time the revelation was complete, the damage was done. The quiet cousin, underestimated, dismissed, ignored, had executed a victory that no amount of arrogance could undo. The fire that had burned inside me for days, weeks, and months was no longer just a private inferno. It was visible, undeniable and devastating in its impact. I stood there, calm, composed, victorious, while Mara and Lila grappled with the reality of exposure, and for the first time in days, maybe even weeks, I felt the heavy weight lift from my chest. Rage had transformed into triumph. Anger had become justice, and the quiet cousin, once invisible, had finally been seen. The room was ablaze with light, chandeliers catching every glint, reflecting diamonds across the polished marble floors of the sapphire pavilion. Conversations bubbled around me, polite, indifferent, unaware of the quiet storm building at the center. I could hear Mara's laughter before I even saw her raise her glass, that sharp, practiced trill of superiority that made my skin crawl. Her eyes scanned the room, catching on familiar faces, guests eager to be charmed, to be dazzled by the family they deemed untouchable. "Everyone," she announced, voice dripping with condescension. "Lily tries so very hard. Freelance design, small accounts, steady savings. Bless her heart." The words hit me like cold steel, sharp and cruel. Laughter erupted, echoing through the pavilion like an avalanche, warm and familiar to those in her circle, but cutting like glass in my ears. My stomach twisted, knotted with the humiliation they had orchestrated so meticulously. My lips pressed together, holding back words that could never undo what they had done. I forced my jaw to relax and my expression to remain neutral. If they expected a reaction, they would be sorely disappointed. Silence was my shield, patience my weapon. Then, as if on cue, Lila strutted forward. Every step was deliberate, calculated to dominate the attention of the room. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the marble, a soundtrack to her arrogance. She held her chin high, lips curled into that infuriatingly smug smile, eyes glittering with a combination of mischief and triumph. "Strong women," she said, voice clear and audacious. "Take what they want. They don't wait around saving for some tiny condo." The words slashed through me as precise as any blade. Behind them, the projector flickered to life. A sequence of Venice photos appeared on the large screen, images of opulent yachts, glittering cocktails, expensive spas, all flaunted in my name, purchased with money that had once belonged to me. The room oohed politely, some guests whispering to each other, impressed by the apparent extravagance. My humiliation was complete, or so they thought. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms, the steel of my resolve hardening with every passing second. The heat of anger rose, but I swallowed it down, keeping my voice and demeanor calm. Invisibility was the power I had honed for years. Let them believe they had won. Let them believe the quiet cousin, the one they had dismissed, was powerless. They would soon learn how dangerous patience could be. Across the room, out of the corner of my eye, I caught Sanjay's subtle nod. A small gesture, but it spoke volumes. The briefcase at his side, seemingly innocuous, was in fact a vault of truth. Every transaction, every fraudulent withdrawal, every moment of theft meticulously documented, securely stored. The time was near, and the anticipation thrummed through me like a live wire. Uncle Robert stepped forward, commanding attention without raising his voice. "Enough," he said, calm and deliberate, carrying authority effortlessly. This isn't about taking. It's about timing. All eyes turned to him. Mara's smile faltered ever so slightly, the first crack in her flawless facade. Lila's confidence wavered, just imperceptibly, but I noticed. That was enough. Timing, patience, and precision were mine to command tonight. The projector screen flickered. The carefully curated images of Venice, the photos meant to flaunt wealth and intimidate, dissolved in an instant. They were replaced with something far more damning: bank transaction logs. Timestamps, withdrawals, transfers, all highlighted with meticulous care. Evidence of theft too blatant to ignore. A low gasp filled the room. Mara's face drained of color, the emeralds around her neck suddenly feeling like chains. Lila's jaw slackened, her fingers frozen midair as she reached for her phone, instinctively attempting to regain control. But it was too late. The evidence was absolute, irrefutable, and it was displayed for everyone to see. Lily built a case, Uncle Robert announced, voice steady and unyielding, cutting through the murmurs. I asked her to wait until tonight. Mara's scream tore through the room, sharp and venomous. We taught her, she yelled, indignation and disbelief intertwining into a perfect storm of desperation. She gestured wildly, trying to assert dominance, but it was too late. The facade had crumbled, revealing the extent of her greed and audacity. Sanjay stepped forward smoothly, his presence commanding yet unobtrusive. Felony theft, he said, voice low but carrying across the room. The evidence is airtight. 450,000 embezzled, now under audit. The room transformed. Confusion rippled through the guests at first. What had begun as polite shock shifted into genuine disbelief. Conversations stopped mid-word, whispers froze, and the weight of the revelation settled over the hall like a dense fog. Mara's eyes darted around, desperate for support, for any semblance of control. But there was none. Lila's hand trembled as she reached for a drink, only to realize that even the smallest gesture of composure was meaningless now. Mr. Gupta, a powerful client whose presence alone could shift influence in our industry, stood. His voice cut through the tension, deliberate and commanding. We back you, Lily. Let's expand operations by 50%. The room erupted in applause. Gasps, murmurs, and shuffling conversations gave way to an overwhelming wave of approval and admiration directed at me. The momentum was unstoppable. Mara's protests, sharp and desperate, fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the growing chorus of validation and support. Lila's attempts at interference were no more than background noise, impotent against the avalanche of evidence and authority that had been marshaled against them. You can't, Mara shrieked, her voice quivering as she realized the futility of her position. I can, Uncle Robert said, calm and decisive, and with those two words, the matter was settled. The power that had been stolen from me was restored, and the humiliation and hubris of Mara and Lila were laid bare for all to see. In that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't require rage. It doesn't need a storm of anger, nor does it demand dramatic outbursts. True vengeance is quiet, patient, calculated. It is a meticulous orchestration of events, evidence, and timing. It is knowing when to strike, understanding that the longest-lasting wounds are inflicted not by immediate fury, but by measured, deliberate precision. And tonight, I was the storm. Not the chaotic, unrestrained tempest they expected, but a deliberate, controlled force, quiet in its approach, yet devastating in its impact. The room had witnessed it, every guest and every influential figure, and I felt a sense of vindication that words could scarcely capture. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of triumph settle around me like a warm, reassuring cloak. Every sneer, every insult, every moment of doubt they had inflicted upon me over the years now felt like fuel, powering a fire that had been building silently inside. The humiliation I had endured, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety, all of it culminated here, in this perfect, irrevocable moment. I glanced at Sanjay, who gave me a discreet smile, and Uncle Robert, who nodded approvingly. They had both understood the value of patience, the power of timing. Together, we had orchestrated not just a personal victory, but a demonstration of justice, of precision, of inevitability. Mara and Lila, once so confident, so untouchable, were now reduced to shadows of their former selves. Their arrogance had been their undoing, And as the applause continued, I realized that the quietest, most overlooked among us often carries the sharpest edge. Tonight, I didn't just reclaim what was stolen. I reclaimed my dignity, my pride, and my sense of self. I had turned humiliation into triumph, betrayal into strategy, and pain into power. As the gala continued around me, filled with laughter and celebration that no longer belonged to Mara and Lila, I understood a truth that had taken years of observation and endurance to learn. Patience is not passive. Invisibility is not weakness. Silence is not submission. All of these, when wielded with intent and precision, become weapons of immense strength. And I wielded them tonight with a mastery they could never hope to comprehend. By the time the evening drew to a close, the Sapphire Pavilion had borne witness not just to my vindication, but to a transformation. The quiet cousin, the one who had once been dismissed, ignored, and underestimated, had emerged as a force to be reckoned with. I smiled quietly to myself, savoring the satisfaction that was mine alone. No one could take this moment from me, not Mara, not Lila, not anyone who had ever doubted me. And as I walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the glittering chandeliers, the polished marble, and the echoes of shocked whispers, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Revenge, I realized, is not about rage. It is about timing, patience, and precision. It is about becoming the storm that no one sees coming, yet leaves a lasting mark. Tonight, I was that storm. The applause rolled through the Sapphire Pavilion like a tidal wave, sweeping away every last trace of control Mara and Lila had once wielded over the room. It was thunderous, reverberating off the high ceilings and the sparkling chandeliers, filling every corner with validation and triumph. The echoes of approval were almost physical, pressing against my chest, reminding me of every sleepless night, every stolen dream, every pang of humiliation I had endured for the past months. Mara shrieked, her voice shrill, cracking under the weight of disbelief. "This is absurd. Lily is manipulating all of you." Her words were venomous, designed to poison minds, to sow doubt among the crowd, but they fell on deaf ears. The guests, influential clients, longtime family friends, and even distant relatives had seen the evidence, and their loyalty shifted immediately. No one questioned the truth now. Mara's manipulations, her polished performances, her entire carefully constructed image, shattered in an instant. Lila, still standing beside her, dropped her phone in shock. The device hit the marble floor with a dull thud, bouncing slightly before skidding to a stop. Her eyes widened in horror, a flash of helplessness replacing the arrogant confidence she had worn so effortlessly moments before. It was a rare, unguarded moment, and I could see every emotion written across her face. Fear, disbelief, shame, and the faintest glimmer of regret. Sanjay, standing quietly to the side until now, stepped forward with calm authority. He laid out the evidence methodically, as though he were giving a presentation to a courtroom rather than a gala. Bank records, cloud-backed footage, detailed financial audits, all meticulously documented and cross-verified. His voice was deliberate, unhurried, each word a hammer striking the truth home. "Comply within 48 hours, or face prosecution," he said, closing the final gap with an almost imperceptible flourish of his hand. The gravity in his tone left no room for negotiation, no space for excuses. Mara gasped audibly, clutching at Lila, as if holding on could somehow anchor her to the world she thought she controlled. "We're family," she cried, desperation woven thick into her tone. But her claim rang hollow in the silence that followed. Family. Yes, they had used that word as a shield, as a justification for entitlement and greed. But family doesn't burn a loved one's future in a fire pit. That had been their undoing. And tonight it was undeniable. Uncle Robert's gaze swept the room like frost on glass, cold, unyielding, and precise. "Family doesn't burn family's future in a fire pit," he stated simply, each word weighted with authority and finality. His voice didn't raise, but it needed no volume. It carried the inevitability of justice. The room seemed to shrink in his presence. Even the most skeptical onlookers understood that the tide had shifted irreversibly. Mara's carefully applied lipstick cracked under the tension of her despair, splitting at the corners as she tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. Lila clung to her mother, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her usual polished facade crumbling like fragile porcelain. The power they had assumed untouchable, the arrogance and entitlement they had wielded like weapons, lay in ruin before me. And I, once overlooked, invisible, underestimated, stood at the center of it, calm, collected, victorious. Security personnel, blending discreetly into the background of the gala, stepped forward subtly. Their presence was quiet but unmistakable, a silent warning that consequences were immediate for anyone daring to step out of line. Mara's and Lila's attempts to salvage pride faltered in the face of that authority. The aura of invincibility they had clung to for so long evaporated, leaving only panic and regret. Mara's voice wavered as she tried, futilely, to reclaim control. "We'll fight this," she declared, but the force behind the words was weak, unconvincing and hollow. There was no room left for resistance. The meticulous documentation, the visible evidence, the witnesses, and the legal framework surrounding the case had made any fight meaningless. Sanjay snapped the briefcase shut with a crisp click that echoed like a gavel, final and resolute. "Every fight digs your grave deeper," he said, his voice carrying calm certainty. There was no room for negotiation, no loopholes, no escape from the consequences of their choices. Mara and Lila staggered out of the pavilion, the doors slamming behind them with finality, sealing the evening and their defeat. The sound was cathartic, a punctuation mark to months of torment and anticipation. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension dissolving into waves of applause and murmurs of admiration. And then, for the first time, the applause turned directly toward me. It rolled across the pavilion with renewed intensity, stronger than before, almost deafening. Guests turned to acknowledge me, nodding, clapping, some even rising to their feet. For the first time in my life, my name, Lily Brown, echoed through the room, not as the quiet cousin in the shadows, not as the underestimated niece or the invisible family member, but as the victor, the one who had orchestrated a triumph so complete that it left even the most influential attendees speechless. In the weeks that followed, Mara and Lila vanished from the scene entirely. Their bank accounts were frozen. Legal proceedings ensured their finances were scrutinized under every possible audit, and their once formidable reputations were reduced to whispers and cautionary tales. Their social presence diminished. As invitations ceased, clients turned away, and their allies quietly distanced themselves. The arrogance that had once shielded them like armor had crumbled, and no amount of pride or influence could rebuild what had been destroyed. Meanwhile, I reclaimed my life. The papers for my condo lay before me, crisp and official, and as I signed them, sunlight spilled across the polished floors, warm and reassuring. This was not just a property. It was a symbol of every late-night project, every moment of restraint, every ounce of patience I had employed to navigate betrayal and deceit. My dream once stolen was now restored, shiny, tangible, and wholly mine. Professional opportunities blossomed as well. My role in the family business expanded, culminating in my appointment as CFO. The contracts I had once only dreamt of managing were now under my direct supervision. Operations expanded, support grew unwavering, and the once unshakable power of Mara and Lila had been replaced by my competence, strategy, and the respect I had earned through patience and precision. Neither Mara nor Lila ever contacted me again. Whether it was pride, shame, or a combination of both, I will never know. It no longer mattered. Their absence was a quiet reminder of the consequences of underestimating someone whose strength was measured not in bravado, but in patience, strategy, and unyielding resolve. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I imagine Mara alone, replaying that evening in her mind, the night the quiet cousin became the storm. I imagine her wondering how someone she considered invisible, insignificant, and powerless could orchestrate such a precise, devastating, and irreversible victory. And when I think of that, a small, satisfied smile curls on my lips. The narrative they had tried to write for me, the one where I was weak, expendable, forgotten, was now permanently rewritten. I had stopped letting them write my story. I had taken the pen into my own hands, and every decision I made thereafter, every step I took, was guided by that clarity. I no longer allowed arrogance, manipulation, or entitlement to dictate the course of my life. The storm I had become was silent, deliberate, and unstoppable. It was not visible in rage or spectacle, but in the quiet assertion of justice, the calculated reclaiming of stolen power, and the unwavering commitment to truth. And in that storm, I had learned the most crucial lesson. Strength is not always loud. Power does not always announce itself. Victory does not always arrive in a blaze of fury. Sometimes the most formidable force is the one that appears invisible until the moment it strikes. Undeniable, irreversible, and total. And now, 6 weeks later, the consequences of my careful, patient strategy had become clear. Mara and Lila were shadows of the people they once believed themselves to be, while I stood fully realized in my reclaimed life. My condo, a symbol of independence and security, gleamed in the sunlight as I walked through its rooms, finally able to breathe freely, uninterrupted by betrayal or fear. My career, once limited by their influence and my own caution, now flourished under my command. Every contract, every decision, every expansion was mine to steward. Guided by clarity, intelligence, and the knowledge that patience had been my ultimate weapon. And in quiet reflection, I let myself imagine the faces of Mara and Lila. I imagined Mara pacing in solitude, wondering how the quiet cousin, once dismissed, once overlooked, had become a storm they could neither anticipate nor withstand. I imagined Lila, forced to confront the reality of consequences she never anticipated, stripped of privilege and influence, powerless to reclaim what she thought was hers by default. And in these imaginings, I find satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from justice, from the quiet, unshakable triumph of perseverance and intellect over arrogance and theft. I had reclaimed what was stolen, not with fury but with precision. I had transformed humiliation into empowerment, betrayal into strategy, and weakness into undeniable strength. And in doing so, I had ensured that Mara and Lila would never forget my name, not as the quiet cousin, not as the underestimated niece, but as the force that upended their world, irrevocably, patiently, and entirely. I had taken the pen. I had written my own story, and in the quiet of my reclaimed life, I knew one thing for certain. They would never, ever underestimate me again. Betrayal steals more than money. It steals confidence, self-worth, peace of mind. But endurance, patience, and planning transform that theft into strength. Revenge is not rage. It's reclaiming power. It's standing tall in the ashes and saying, I'm still here. To Mara and Lila, thank you. You taught me to be unstoppable. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed aside, you know how sweet justice feels when it finally arrives. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The quiet ones, we always have the best revenge.